integrity, a culture of humility, a culture of excellence, because this is a beautiful country given to the people of Uganda by God to steward on His behalf. And we've just seen amazing miracles of provision and protection. God has also helped us to do some unique things. We started a child care ministry where we reached the most vulnerable orphan children of Uganda. We've rescued over 5,000 of those children. We rescued about 500 child soldiers from northern Uganda. We're in the process of rescuing almost 7,000 vulnerable women who are struggling to raise their children and send their children to school. And that's all a part of the church work. So it's not just what we do on a Sunday in the church, but it is genuinely what we as a church can do for our community. And it's not just doing things for them. All of those things are about empowering them to become better citizens and productive, useful citizens in building their country. So this book is, I wrote to tell that story. And it tells the story of those early difficult days. It tells us the story of why we came to Uganda, and it tells the story of how and why we started some of those things, like reaching the children and the women and so on. And after 40 years of living in Uganda and leading this great church, we had the privilege of handing the responsibilities over to the next generation, to Pastor Julius and Vernita Rotlonyo. And they're doing a great job. There's a great pastoral team, and we believe that the future is going to be very bright for them as they take the vision that God put on our hearts and see it grow and expand. And we genuinely believe the best years for Uganda are ahead. We're building a new Uganda, we're building a new Africa built on the culture of Jesus. The greatest challenge was the insecurity, the theft. We lost the first 2 cars that we drove at gunpoint. We couldn't, it took us 18 months to get a telephone. There were no cell phones. You couldn't buy basic supplies. Anything manufactured was not here. You could buy fresh fruit and vegetables and meat, but not much else. Even dairy was hard to find. Those were difficult years. Later on, those difficulties went away. The government of Uganda and the present government of Uganda changed things. We're living in a very different country today than the country that we lived in back then. We still have the challenge of corruption, and many of the people of the church feel constricted by corruption. They can't really develop their full potential because they have to jump through hoops that are hoops of corruption. Young people feel that in order for them to advance, they have to compromise. That's a challenge for young people today. So the challenge for us is to try and help young Ugandans understand we can build a new Africa, but we better change some of the things that we've done wrong in the past. I think one of the great challenges also was about developing good leadership, because so many leaders are dictatorial, controlling, manipulative. It's about them, it's about their money, it's about their popularity, it's about getting more votes, if you like, if they're politicians. We can't do that. We have to be a nation of servant leaders. And whether you're a doctor, you serve your patients, a teacher serves the students, a pastor serves the people, a politician is supposed to be a public servant. The challenge is to change that kind of mindset and thinking in an entire nation. And I believe we can when the young people take on that mindset and go into the next generation of leadership, saying we're not going to be like it was in the past. And so those have been the challenges.
I remember, to allow my fellow journalists to maybe ask, I remember when you really stretched your voice towards the compromise of the young people, not to compromise or not to be influenced by Western powers. What did you mean?
There are many social and pressures on the developing world to adopt what I consider to be corrupt moral practices, which I don't think are healthy for building a nation. And the Western world is trying to impose those values on us and require us to change things within our constitution in order for us to receive aid money. and it affects education, it affects business, it affects lots of things. The entertainment culture that comes in. I think I want to challenge the Ugandan young people to say, let's not depend on aid and try to be bought by others. Let's build an Africa where we depend on trade, where we can build an Africa that is prosperous. This country has huge potential agriculturally, in terms of natural mineral resources, in terms of even the great. They're intelligent. They go around the world and they rise to the top of their professions around the world in the diaspora. Why don't we start doing some of that right here and build a new Africa right here? So that's the challenge that I have to young people today. We can build a new Africa, but we won't build it on the back of corruption or inept, poor, dictatorial, controlling leadership. We must build it on the back of servant leadership at every level. We need to make money, we need to make good money, but we need to also be generous and kind in the way that we are to people. We need to pay our taxes. We need to make sure that the tax base is a proper, healthy tax base, and and we need to be a government, the next government, of young people, whoever that is, who gets tax money and spends it properly, so that we have infrastructure that can help this country become what it becomes. That's not my role as a pastor. My role as a pastor is to build that moral foundation, but to inspire the young people to take that moral foundation into the streets, into the marketplaces, into the squares of our city, and into the towns and the villages, and build a new Africa that's based upon that kind of moral foundation.
Thank you so much.
The most critical components of success in any community is the issue of unity. To have healthy community, you must have common unity. We must all be working together towards the same things. And there are some things that that we may disagree on and may not fully agree on, but we can agree to agree. We can agree to agree agreeably. We can be kind, and we can be considerate, and we can be polite, and we can be supportive and encouraging. And if we have something to say that is not necessarily nice about someone else, it's best to go to that person by themselves and try to talk with them themselves, instead of trying to bring it in front of the press or saying it from your own platform, which might be a pulpit, or it might be some social media platform. So I think that the lack of unity at every level within any community, whether it's political disunity or whether it's church disunity or even economic disunity, will only hold us back. We have to have something that is common, and what is common for us must be our vision. What is our vision? So we have to ask, what is the vision for the church? And then we have to gather around that common vision. We may do it differently and express it differently through different languages or through different styles of worship, but we must agree agreeably to let each person get to the same goal, which is that common vision. Same politically. Politically, we must have a vision, not just to be elected into power, but we must be elected in order to serve the people of Uganda. There are ways that we can gather. It must begin with vision. What is your vision for your church? What is the vision for the church? What is the vision for our nation? What is the vision for our business? What is the vision for our medical community? If we gather around common vision and we demonstrate unity, we're all going to have to give up something in order to walk in unity. And we compromise on some of the areas that are not critical, but we gather around those things that are essential. And taking the time to, behind closed doors, iron out our differences, we could begin to demonstrate a unity that would advance the cause of the kingdom and bring about the release of the power of God. The Bible talks about the fact that it is in our unity that the power of God is released. That's where we need to be. Uganda is not what it is today, not just because we may have some politicians who are not doing a good job. We have pastors who are not doing a good job. They're fighting with each other, and they are saying nasty things about each other, and they're writing nasty things about each other, and it is a disgrace, and it is a shame, and it is not the way that Jesus wants us to live. We're Ugandans. Let's work together. Let's be friends. Let's encourage each other. Let's be open and honest. And if someone hurts you, Jesus says there's something called forgiveness. We need to demonstrate that within our society. The reality of spiritual forces, and it requires us to not allow or bring any religious activities into the core of the community, whether it's parliament or schools or whatever. And so there's a cutting off of the influence of the church within Western secular societies. That, I don't have to be a prophet to tell you, it will fail, because it is not satisfying. And we're living in an increasingly stress-filled world where there are broken relationships, there is mistrust, nobody trusts politicians, nobody trusts policemen, nobody trusts pastors, nobody trusts fathers. That's the result of secular humanism, which will fail and implode. I think you're going to see that the rise of human secularism is going to become so dissatisfying that they're going to look for something else. And what is the answer that they're going to find? It cannot be the classic old-fashioned church of old Europe. It must be a modern, new church that addresses the issues of life through the modern lens of Christianity as we face it today. The truths never change, but the way we present truths change. And so the church is going to look different. It's going to be youth-oriented. It's going to have a different style of music. It's going to have a different style of communication. It's going to have a different style of writing. It's going to be very different in the way that it presents itself, and it will be attractive to the young people. And that's part of what has happened here at WATOTO. We've seen a very different style of church appeal to young people, and it's left behind the old style. The old style was not wrong. It was relevant to its day. The new style is relevant to this day. We're going to see the same thing happen in Europe. Young people are going to say no to the folly of human Western secularism, to the rejection of spiritual truths. People are popping pills, living on stress medication in order to just cope. We're going to see the simplification of life. We're going to see people wanting to live quieter, simpler lives, not so much in the cities, getting back to the earth a little more. We're going to see worship, instead of being a big presentation that is like a show. We're going to see the emergence of a more quiet, reflective style. There are going to be many changes that happen. In Germany, in Europe, we are going to see that happen. That's what's happening already. I have friends in Europe who lead youth ministries. Young people are fed up of the rubbish that is being rammed down their throats by human Western secular governments. And they're going to rise up and say, I want some truth. Right now, they're being told there is no truth. No young person is that stupid. They know there is truth, and they want to know what it is. And from my opinion, the truth is Jesus. The truth is the Bible. The truth is the kingdom of God. It's the only place where we have hope, peace, security in life. We went in different directions. His ministry led him to a lot of international ministry and healing ministry and different things. He built a great church within Kampala in a different part of the city that we did. And he went on to do some really significant things. He's touched and influenced a lot of people's lives. I went in a different direction, building a very different kind of church with a different impact. I've never had a problem with Pastor Robert. He's never had a problem with me. I've never spoken very evil about him, and if he has, I don't know about him speaking evil of me. And the amazing thing is that we've ended up as neighbors. We literally live next door to each other. He built a house, and I built a house, and they happen to be next door, and we're good neighbors. It's the story of an ordinary couple following God's extraordinary call. Jesus said that he would build his church, and that nothing hell could throw at it would stop its advance. History has proven that to be true. The most successful institution on the planet, bar none, is the Church of the Lord Jesus Christ. It has stood the test of time. It has impacted and changed for the better the lives of more people than any other movement ever. It has survived brutal persecution. No internal factions, infighting, or denominational division has held back its steady advance. It is alive and thriving in almost every nation and people group. And the overriding hero of all of it is none other than Jesus, who is worshipped and adored every day all around the world by more people than can be counted. That worship takes place in churches that meet in magnificent cathedrals or under sprawling trees in the most remote village. The very best social and humanitarian work ever done is by the church. The most blessed nations the planet has ever witnessed were built on the ethos, the culture, and the character of Christ and his church. And here is the great thing about how God builds the church. God uses ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary things. Marilyn and I are ordinary people. We have many extraordinary stories, but the remarkable and miraculous things in the following pages have little to do with our ability, courage, or strength. We have been privileged to play a part in God's remarkable work. That work is a movement, and it's called the church. The part we play intertwines with so many other faithful people in Uganda and around the world. This dynamic, life-changing movement, the church, spans many generations and will continue until Jesus returns and well after the two of us are gone. This is our story, but it is more than that. It reports what Jesus can do through people who choose obedience. It's the story of what an all-powerful, all-loving God can do in and through each of us when we say yes to him. Yes to his radical and life-altering invitation, not just to believe, but to walk in his footsteps and to follow him far beyond the comfort and the complacency that has become all too common in the modern church. That's the heart of this book and our story. We want to share and celebrate the marvelous things God has done in calling us to Uganda and encourage, challenge, and inspire those who read it. We pray that you will discover God's radical calling for your life. He is inviting you, just as he invited us, to follow him on the adventure of a lifetime and to bring about transformation in this world through the powerful working of his Spirit who lives in you. I wrote the book because if I don't write it, what God has done will be forgotten. The book of Acts is a record of the acts of the apostles. If it had not been written, we would not know the amazing things that God did. Whether it was going to prison, or being led out of a wall, down a wall, or whether it was going and fighting a snake that had bitten him, the apostle. There were many great stories. The process was the planting of the early church. If I didn't write this story, the amazing things that God did in the last 40 years would have been forgotten. So it is a record. It is also, I wrote it because I wanted to be an inspiration to the next generation. If God can use me, he can use you. And I remember as a boy reading many stories of great people doing great things and thinking, wow, I'd like to do something with my life. I hope that there will be some young people that will read this book and say, wow, I want to do something with my life. That's right. I also wrote it as a challenge because as you read the story, it's a challenge to believe that our country, which God has brought from a very difficult place, kind of tell the story a little bit beginning pre-church days, which were in some ways bad days, with a lot of things going on, and then the church came and changed the culture of Uganda. Then there was a period when things fell apart and it became a dark country again, but it's the church's responsibility again to rise up and rebuild Uganda, as it is a responsibility for all of us. So I believe as a challenge to build a better country, a better continent, and that is based upon the culture and the ethos of Christ. So that's really why I wrote the book.
Well, thank you, Gary. As the
Years. I'm reminded of the fact that most of Uganda is very young. Half of Uganda is under the age of 15, and 75% of Uganda is under the age of 30, which means that most of Uganda don't know the story of what Uganda was like when we first came to Uganda 40 years ago. And it certainly was a beautiful country at that time, but it was a broken country. I think of Winston Churchill, who came in, and I've read his book, which he wrote in the early 1900s about his journey to Uganda. And he came by ox cart from Entebbe to Jinja, from Entebbe to Kampala. And he wrote at that time about Uganda, and he called it the Pearl of Africa. And that has stuck with us. And it is a beautiful name for a beautiful country. I remember reading, I think it was the Newsweek magazine, in the days when we were going to come to Uganda, and one article had on it, the bloody Pearl of Africa. And because that's where Uganda had come to. And it was at that time that we felt very strongly God called us to Uganda to plant an English-speaking church downtown in the heart of the capital city, Kampala. And God's instructions to me were very clear. He said, through that church, I want to touch the city, I want to touch the nation. And I remember thinking, wow, that's a huge assignment, that any church could have the impact of really having to touch a city and touch a nation. And so we did come 41 years ago, and it has been the most amazing journey that I think anybody could ever have. It's been tough in those early years, but as the church grew and as we began to become a part of Uganda, so that we were no longer just visitors, but really made this our home. Our children ended up, leaving after school and so on, and then the government graciously at one point came, someone from the government came, sat in my office and said, we'd like to give you citizenship. And we were so delighted and honored. It was a great honor for us to be given that privilege. And I had two passports. My mother was British and my dad was Canadian, so they said, you need to give us one of them. I said, oh, I don't know if I want to do that. So they said, well, we'll give you life residence. But Marilyn only had one passport, so she has one passport. One passport, a Canadian passport, so she got a Ugandan passport. So now I love to tell people that I'm married to a Ugandan. And I think you'll pick this up very much in the book as you go along, is that we felt very strongly that we were here to plant a church, and it was very clear that it would be an English-speaking church. And the reason was that God wanted us to have impact in the next generation of Ugandans. That really was our focus. And so from the very outset, what was Kampala Pentecostal Church, and then which became WATOTO Church, we did everything we could to inspire and challenge and provoke the youth of Uganda to develop a culture of integrity, a culture of humility, a culture that reflects the character of Jesus, a culture that is kingdom culture. We certainly didn't come to impose Canadian culture. We don't believe that just Ugandan culture that is what we need to do. We need to kingdom culture that reflects the heart of Jesus, which is love, justice, and kindness, and goodness, and generosity, and grace, and meekness. And so I would have to say that after all these 40 years, I think if we have in any way had an impact, it has been on the next generation. Part of that, God very clearly helped us to understand that it was not about building a big church, although we are a big church, but that it was about reaching, and a lot of well-known people and more wealthy Ugandans came to Uganda to come to the church. God began to very clearly lead us to reach out to the most vulnerable in Uganda, the orphan children and the most vulnerable women in Uganda who are struggling to raise their children, child soldiers in northern Uganda, the community of northern Uganda, which was suffering great trauma after the war in the north. And then, of course, God also, we felt strongly to go to South Sudan, where we planted a campus as well. And so even though sometimes I think people say, you know that church where the Mzungu pastor, that rich church? No, we are a church that cares for poor people. We're here for the youth. And all of that is really captured in this account, which I must admit